In May of 2023, Guy Gauthier, Shai Gordon, and their colleagues, a team of computer scientists and Assyriologists from Tel Aviv University and Ariel University in Israel, published a paper that on the surface looked like a routine machine learning result. The paper described a neural network they had built to translate Akkadian into modern English. Akkadian is the language of ancient Babylon and Assyria. It was written in cuneiform script on clay tablets between roughly 2500 BCE and 100 CE. The model worked. It scored on the standard machine translation evaluation metric comparably to commercial translators built for modern languages with millions of native speakers. It could read cuneiform glyphs directly from their digital representation. It could handle administrative records, royal inscriptions, and legal documents. That paper was the moment a problem that had constrained the study of Mesopotamian civilization for more than 150 years began for the first time to break open. The problem is one of scale. There are approximately 500,000 to 600,000 cuneiform tablets and fragments in the museums and university collections of the world. Most of them were excavated in the great archaeological expeditions of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Layard's work at Nineveh, Loftus and Woolley at Ur, the German expeditions at Uruk, the Italian campaign at Ebla. They were boxed, catalogued, shipped to London and Paris and Berlin and Philadelphia and Chicago and stored. And then they sat there. Approximately 90% of them, between 450,000 and 540,000 individual tablets, have never been fully published or translated. They are not lost. They are not hidden. They are sitting in museum drawers, in archive rooms, in research collection stacks, waiting for somebody to read them. The reason nobody has is that there are, at any given time, fewer than 500 working Assyriologists in the world. Cuneiform is hard. The languages it records are dead. The script encodes hundreds of signs with multiple readings per sign in dialects that drift across 3,000 years of continuous use. A skilled Assyriologist might publish a few dozen tablets in a productive career. The math does not work. The tablets are accumulating faster than the field can read them. This is the bottleneck the 2023 paper was built to address, not to replace human translators, to help them. To take the routine work, the administrative texts, the receipts, the legal records that make up the bulk of the surviving corpus, and process them at machine speed so that human specialists could focus on the harder material, the literary epics, the priestly letters, the religious texts where the cultural content actually lives. 2 years later, the project has expanded. The open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus, the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, the Digital Hammurabi Project at Johns Hopkins. All of them are working with neural translation tools built on the foundation the 2023 paper laid. Tens of thousands of previously untranslated tablets are now being processed for the first time. New texts are coming online every month. The catalog of what we can read, after 150 years of waiting, is finally growing at something like the speed at which the tablets were originally excavated. What the texts are revealing is more substantive than most popular accounts have suggested. Not in some hidden form, not in some long-suppressed alternative tradition, in the actual mainstream content of the actual cuneiform corpus. The Mesopotamians, more than 1,000 years before any of these stories entered the Hebrew Bible, were already writing about how humanity was created, how it almost died in a great flood, how one man and his family survived in a boat, how the gods debated giving or withholding eternal life, how the boundary between divine and human power was negotiated, transgressed, and ultimately enforced. These are not theories, they are texts. They are sitting in the British Museum and the Louvre and the Penn Museum and the Oriental Institute in Chicago. They have been there for 150 years. What the AI translation systems are now doing is making the supporting corpus, the thousands of tablets that surround the famous literary texts and provide the context in which they were written, readable for the first time at scale. What the actual cuneiform tablets actually say. The AI tools that are finally making them readable at the speed the volume of material demands. Why the Mesopotamian source layer of the foundational stories of Western religion is, in 2026, finally getting the attention it has deserved since George Smith identified a Babylonian flood story in the British Museum in November of 1872. The first cities of the human record are the place to start. Eridu, in the Sumerian tradition, was the first city. The tablets describe it as the place where kingship first descended from heaven, where the god Enki, Ea in the later Akkadian form, established his temple, where the long tradition of organized urban civilization in southern Mesopotamia began. The site is real. It is now called Tel Abu Sharain in southern Iraq. Excavations there have documented continuous occupation from the late 6th millennium BCE onward. Nippur, further north, was the religious center of Sumer. It was sacred to Enlil, the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon, the god of air and storm and authority. The site, modern Nufar, has produced approximately 50,000 recovered tablets, one of the largest single archaeological tablet collections in the world. The Sumerian literary corpus is largely a Nippur corpus. The Sumerian flood narrative, the Sumerian creation traditions, the early king lists, the temple hymns. Most of what we know about how the Sumerians described themselves to themselves comes from tablets that came out of the ground at Nippur. In 1974, at a site called Tel Marduk in modern Syria, an Italian expedition under Paolo Matthei of the University of Rome La Sapienza began recovering an archive from the burned remains of a royal palace. The palace had belonged to a city called Ebla. The archive contained approximately 17,000 cuneiform tablets dating to the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. The Ebla archive is one of the largest single tablet finds in the history of the field. Translating it has been the work of 2 generations of Italian Assyriologists. It is still ongoing. The AI tools that the 2023 paper laid the foundation for are now being applied to the unpublished Ebla material. The results, even at this early stage, are reshaping the picture of northern Syria in the mid-3rd millennium. This is the scale of the material the AI is unlocking. Hundreds of thousands of tablets written in 2 related but distinct languages recovered from dozens of sites across Iraq, Syria, Iran, and southern Turkey, covering more than 3,000 years of continuous documentary tradition. The neural translation models are not magic. They are tools that take administrative texts a human Assyriologist could read in 20 minutes and process them in seconds. The compounding effect across the unread 90% of the corpus is what is making the next decade of Mesopotamian studies look different from the previous 15. The most consequential single literary text in the surviving Akkadian corpus for understanding what the Mesopotamians believed about the creation of humanity is the Atrahasis epic. The name means something like the exceedingly wise. The poem survives most completely in a copy dated to approximately 1700 BCE. It tells in 3 long tablets the story of how human beings to exist and what happened to them when the gods regretted creating them. The narrative begins before humanity. In the Atrahasis cosmology, the world is run by the gods. The gods themselves are divided into 2 classes. The senior gods sit in council and decide the fate of the cosmos. The junior gods, called in the text the Igigi, do the actual physical labor of the world. They dig the rivers. They maintain the canals. They cultivate the fields. They do. In other words, the agricultural and infrastructural work without which Mesopotamian civilization could not function. The Agigi rebel. They have been working for too long. The labor is too hard. They lay down their tools. They burn their carrying baskets. They march on the home of Enlil, the chief god, demanding relief. The senior gods, in council, debate what to do. The proposal that wins, advanced by Enki, the wise god, the god of fresh water and craft, is to create a new class of beings to take over the labor, humans. The text describes the creation in technical, ritual terms. The mother goddess, working with Enki, mixes clay with the blood of a slain god and the spit of the divine council. The mixture is shaped. The shaped figures are activated. The result is humanity. Beings made of clay and divine substance, created specifically to perform the agricultural and infrastructural labor that the lower gods refused to do any longer. This is the actual content of the Atrahasis text. Humans were created to work. That is the foundational claim. It is not a hidden teaching. It is right there in the surviving tablets. It has been translated, retranslated, and analyzed by generations of Assyriologists since the first fragments of Atrahasis were identified in the late 19th century. What happens next is the part of the story that gives the text its biblical resonance. The humans, once created, prove successful. They take over the labor. They multiply. And they multiply rapidly. Within a few generations, the human population has grown so large that, in the language of the text, the noise of humanity disturbs the rest of the gods. Enlil cannot sleep. The world is too loud. The chief god of the Mesopotamian pantheon decides that humanity has become a problem. He acts. The Atrahasis text describes a sequence of population reductions. First, a plague, then a drought, then, when the human population proves resilient, a great flood. The flood narrative in Atrahasis is the original Mesopotamian flood story. It survives in older Sumerian forms as well. The Eridu Genesis, where the flood survivor is named Ziusudra, is the earliest. By the time the story is incorporated into the standard Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 11, recovered from the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, the survivor's name has shifted to Utnapishtim. Both names appear in different layers of the surviving tradition. They are the same figure across two different Mesopotamian languages. What the flood narrative says, across all its surviving versions, is that the chief god decides to destroy humanity. The wise god, Enki in the Sumerian, Ea in the Akkadian, secretly warns one righteous man. The man is told to build a great boat, to take into it his family, his animals, and seed of every kind. The flood comes. It rains for 7 days and 7 nights. The waters rise. The world is destroyed. The boat lands. When the waters recede, on a mountain, the survivor sends out birds to test whether the land has emerged. He emerges. He offers a sacrifice. The gods, smelling the smoke of the sacrifice, gather around it. They decide, in the end, not to destroy humanity again. This is the Mesopotamian flood narrative. It is the source layer for the Genesis flood story. The chronology is not in doubt. The Atrahasis poem, the Sumerian flood narrative in the Eridu Genesis, and the Gilgamesh flood tablet all date to centuries, in some cases more than a millennium, before the Genesis flood narrative was composed. George Smith, an Assyriologist and the British Museum, identified the Gilgamesh flood tablet in November of 1872. He was so excited by the discovery, according to colleagues at the time, that he reportedly began removing his clothes in the museum reading room. That moment was when the Western academic world had to come to terms with the fact that the most famous narrative in the Bible had a documented Mesopotamian precursor. What the AI translation tools are now adding to this picture is not the flood narrative itself. The flood narrative has been known and studied for more than 150 years. What the tools are adding is the context. The administrative records of the cities that produced the flood narrative, the royal letters of the kings who commissioned its preservation, the temple inventories that show how the religion in which the flood story was embedded actually operated day to day in the cities of southern Iraq 3,000 years ago. The previously unread 90% of the corpus is the part the AI is opening up. The famous literary texts at the center of it have been read for generations. The Adapa myth gets less popular attention and more scholarly attention. The story is one of the most striking single narratives in the surviving Akkadian corpus. It is preserved on tablets from Tel El Amarna in Egypt, found in the diplomatic archive of an Egyptian pharaoh, indicating the story was circulating widely in the broader ancient Near East. Additional tablets have been recovered from Nineveh and other Mesopotamian sites. The narrative is short. deeply strange, and it continues to be one of the most discussed texts in the literary corpus. Adapa is a man. He is described as a sage, a priest of Enki at Eridu, a son of Enki in some traditions. He is exceptionally wise. He has been given understanding by his divine father, but he has not been given immortality. The story turns on a single incident. Adapa is fishing on the sea when the south wind capsizes his boat. In response, Adapa curses the south wind. The wind is broken for 7 days. The interruption of the wind disturbs the order of the cosmos. The high god Anu, the Lord of Heaven, summons Adapa to his presence to answer for what he has done. Before Adapa goes, his father Enki gives him instructions. Anu will offer you food and water. Enki says, do not eat the food, do not drink the water. They are the food of death. If you eat them, you will die. Adapa goes to heaven. He is received by Anu. He answers for the broken wind. And then, in a moment that has puzzled and fascinated readers since the tablet was first translated, Anu offers him the food and water of life. Not death. Life. Eternal life. The chance offered to a single mortal to step across the line that separates humans from gods. Adapa, following his father's instructions, refuses. The moment passes. Anu, surprised, sends Adapa back to Earth. Mortal. The chance has been declined. Humanity, for whom Adapa, as the first sage, stands as a kind of representative, has lost through Enki's strange counsel the possibility of immortality. The text does not explain why Enki gave the instructions he gave. The motivation has been debated by Assyriologists for more than a century. Some scholars argue Enki was protecting Adapa from a trick, that Anu's offer was a deception, and the food really was the food of death. Others argue Enki was, in fact, jealous of Anu, concerned that an immortal human would shift the cosmic balance. A third reading takes the whole story as a Mesopotamian theodicy in narrative form, an explanation for why humans die when the gods do not. What the story unambiguously is the surviving textual ancestor of every narrative in the Western tradition where humans are denied immortality through deception or refusal. The fruit of the garden in Genesis, the waters of life in countless later mythologies, the boundary between divine and human existence marked by a single forbidden act with the consequence of mortality. Adapa, the original, refusing the food of life on the advice of the god who made him. Going home mortal. The 7 sages of Mesopotamian tradition, the Apkallu in Akkadian, are part of the same conceptual world. The tradition holds that before the flood, 7 wise beings brought civilization to humanity. They taught the arts, they established the cities, they organized the rituals. Adapa is sometimes counted as the first of them. The Apkallu appear in Neo-Assyrian palace reliefs, in god lists, and in the protective rituals that surrounded Mesopotamian royal architecture. They are the foundational sages of the surviving cuneiform traditions, account of how civilization itself came into being. All of this, including Atrahasis, the flood, Adapa, and the Apkallu, is in the tablets. It has been in the tablets for as long as cuneiform has been read. The AI tools that the 2023 Tel Aviv Ariel University team built and that subsequent projects have extended are not revealing this material for the first time. They are doing something more useful in some ways. They are revealing the surrounding context, the supporting documentation, the administrative records, the royal correspondence, the legal texts, and the temple inventories. These documents place those literary narratives into the actual functioning civilization that produced them. What the AI is and is not doing is worth being precise about. The AI is doing real work. The 2023 paper is a real paper. The neural translation tools score on standard machine translation metrics comparably to commercial translators for modern languages. They can process administrative tablets at speeds no human team could match. They are accelerating the publication of previously unread material in ways that will reshape Mesopotamian studies over the next decade. The AI also has limitations. The team that built it has been open about them. The 2023 paper reports that translation accuracy degrades significantly on sentences longer than approximately 118 characters. The models hallucinate more on literary and poetic texts, such as priestly letters, treaties, and hymns, than on administrative records. The current generation of tools works best as an assistant to human Assyriologists, not as a replacement for them. What the AI has not revealed, and what it cannot reveal, because the underlying texts do not say it, is the framework that some popular accounts have layered over the surviving cuneiform corpus. There is no Mesopotamian phrase that translates as function-bearing life, clay of lower glow, or those who do not multiply. Those phrases come from the work of the late writer Zechariah Sitchin. His 1976 book, The 12th Planet, and the subsequent Earth Chronicles series proposed a reading of Sumerian and Akkadian material that has been comprehensively rejected by working Assyriologists for more than 40 years. The rejection was not refuted. It was simply not absorbed by the popular discourse. Sitchin's translations of key terms, Nibiru, Anunnaki, and the various technical vocabularies he claimed to find in the texts do not correspond to how those words are actually used in the cuneiform corpus. Nibiru, in the surviving Akkadian astronomical literature, is most prominently a term in the MUL, a PIN series. MUL. A PIN is the foundational Mesopotamian astronomical compendium dating to approximately 1000 BCE. The term designates a celestial position, a crossing point, most often identified by scholars with the planet Jupiter, or with a fixed point in the sky used as a reference for other astronomical observations. It is not a 12th planet on a long elliptical orbit. The actual mole, Apen tablets are available. They have been translated multiple times. They say what they say in language that is precise, technical, and well understood. The Anunnaki in Sumerian and Akkadian texts are a class of gods. The term Anuna or Anunnaki in Sumerian can be glossed as princely offspring. It designates the major gods of the pantheon, distinguished from lesser categories of divine beings. They are referred to throughout the literary and ritual corpus. They are deities. They function in the texts the way gods function in any polytheistic religious tradition. They are worshipped, petitioned, propitiated, feared, occasionally cursed. They are not extraterrestrials. The gap between what the AI translation tools have actually revealed and what some popular accounts have claimed they have revealed is the gap between the actual content of the cuneiform corpus and the work of a single 20th century writer whose readings have been rejected by the field for decades. The detailed scholarly response to Sitchin is available. Michael S. Heiser and Jason Colavito have written extensively on the topic. So did the late Samuel Noah Kramer. Kramer was one of the most prolific translators of Sumerian literature in the 20th century. His books, History Begins at Sumerian Mythology, remain the foundational works of the field. The honest version of what the AI is finding does not need any layered reinterpretation to be remarkable. The Mesopotamians wrote more than 4,000 years ago the source layer narratives that the Western religious tradition would inherit, modify, and ultimately transmit to 1 billion people through the Hebrew Bible. They wrote about the creation of humanity from clay. They wrote about a great flood sent by a high god survived by one righteous man and his family in a boat that landed on a mountain. They wrote about a sage who climbed to heaven and was offered immortality, and lost it on what may have been a misunderstanding of his patron's advice. They wrote about the boundary between gods and humans. They wrote about that boundary in language so striking that a Mesopotamian flood narrative on a tablet from the library of an Assyrian king in the 7th century BCE, identified by a British museum curator in November of 1872, became one of the consequential single archaeological discoveries of the 19th century. That is the source layer the AI is helping to make readable at scale, not by revealing hidden material, by processing the vast supporting corpus that places the famous literary texts into the operating context of the cities that produced them. The 2023 paper was the beginning. The 2024 and 2025 follow-up work from the ORACC, CDLI, and Digital Hammurabi teams is the continuation. The previously untranslated 90% of the cuneiform corpus is finally starting to be read. What the texts reveal about humanity is not what some popular accounts have claimed. It is something more interesting. The foundational narratives of Western religion, creation, flood, lost immortality, the divine ordering of human life, were already in fully developed form. The cultural property of the Sumerians and Babylonians, 1,000 years before they entered the Hebrew Bible. The story of how those narratives traveled is one of the great threads of comparative cultural history. From the temples of Eridu and Nippur, through the diplomatic archives of Bronze Age Egypt at Tel El Amarna, through the royal library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, and eventually into the canon that would shape 3 world religions. It is mostly invisible in popular religious education. It is sitting in plain sight in the cuneiform tablets in the British Museum, and the Penn Museum, and the Louvre. The AI is finally making it possible to read the rest of the archive, not to discover the hidden things that some popular accounts have promised would be there. to finally process, at the speed the volume of material demands, the unread administrative and documentary tablets that surround the famous literary texts. To give the next generation of Assyriologists the leverage to push the field forward at a pace it has not been able to manage in any previous era of its history. What that next generation will find, beyond the famous texts that have already been read, is genuinely an open question. New letters, new inscriptions, new administrative archives, new angles on the political and economic history of the cities, new evidence for trade routes, marriage alliances, religious reforms, dynastic transitions. The texture of a 3,000-year civilization that has, until now, been visible only through the small fraction of its surviving documents that human scholars have had time to publish. That is what the AI is opening up. Not a hidden tradition, a vast supporting corpus that has been waiting in museum drawers for somebody with the right tools to come and read it. The first city was Eridu. The wise god was Enki. The flood survivor was named Ziusudra, then Utnapishtim, then Noah. The sage who refused the food of life was Adapa. The first kings in the Sumerian king list preserved on the Weld-Blundell Prism in the Ashmolean Museum are listed by name, by city, and by the length of their reigns. Some of those reigns are mythologized to numbers in the tens of thousands of years. Others are numbers that historians take seriously as possibly real. All of that is in the tablets. It has been in the tablets since they were excavated. What the AI is doing is making the rest of the archive readable at last. The Mesopotamian source layer of the foundational stories of the Western religious tradition has been sitting in museum collections for 150 years, mostly untranslated, mostly unread. In the next 10 years, because of the work that began with the 2023 Tel Aviv and Ariel paper and the projects that followed it, most of it will finally be read. What we will learn from the unread 90% is genuinely not yet known. The famous literary texts have already told us most of what they have to say. The unread tablets, the receipts, the letters, the court records, the temple inventories will tell us the things the literary tradition did not bother to record. What people ate, what they owed, who they married, how the cities actually functioned, what the priesthood actually owned, what the kings actually ordered. The Sumerians and Babylonians, for the first time in the modern study of their civilization, will be talking to us at full volume. Not just through the famous epics, through the entire weight of their documentary record. The translation has begun. The tools are working. The tablets are finally being read. The famous literary texts are what Western academia has been translating for 150 years. The unread 90% of the corpus is what the museum drawers of London and Paris and Berlin and Philadelphia have been quietly holding through that same 150 years. What the AI translation tools have just begun to release, by every measure of the projects now underway, is the part of the Mesopotamian documentary record that the people who first excavated the tablets and the generations of Assyriologists who cataloged them all expected someone to eventually be able to read.